in Montreal. I love that. Hi, Natrajan. All right, so thank you all for joining us today for the Transformative
Savannah,
Power.
Georgia, welcome.
Oh, Georgia.
Yes.
Amazing.
Very
Oh,
exciting.
that's awesome. It's so great to see people from literally around the world tuning in and joining us for this important conversation. Isaac, thank you for your time. My name is Valerie Ndiweni. I'm joined by my colleague, Nayo Gariepi. We're members of the CATS team. And on behalf of McGill University, McGill School of Continuing Studies, and the rest of our team, thank you and welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I would like to introduce our moderator today, just a few housekeeping items. Please keep your mics and your videos off. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions. If you'd like to ask questions, feel free to type it in the chat, and we'll do our best to make sure that your questions are answered. There's quite a few of us today, so we'll make sure to moderate the chat. Awesome. Vancouver Island. This is very cool. Hi, Craig. How are you? Amazing. So I'm about to introduce to you McGill's very own Dr. Carola Weil, the Dean of Continuing Studies. I'd like to call her our Commander-in-Chief. In 2018, Dr. Weil became the Dean of the School, an interdisciplinary faculty dedicated to adult education, experiential and community-based learning that is focused on preparing the next generation of leaders for lifelong learning and the workforce of the future. It is only natural that she is our moderator of choice for this session. Specialized in organizational development, conflict transformation, and humanitarianism, Dr. Weil's career has straddled public policy, nonprofit, and philanthropic sectors in addition to higher education. She has held leadership positions at leading universities in the United States, including the American University in Washington, D.C., the University of Southern California's USC's Annenberg School of Communication and Journalism, and the University of Maryland, where she led the Center for International Development and Conflict Management. You see where I'm going with this. She has also taught and conducted research at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs, and of course, USC. She consults, speaks, and writes on strategy and organizational development, as well as on topics related to gender, inclusion, international education and relations, and human security. This is just to name a few. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Carola Weil.
Make sure I'm off mute. Thank you very much, Valerie. That was much more than I expected. And I think the takeaway is I can't seem to hold down a job. So I tend to move around a lot. But thank you very much to all of you. And really, this session is not at all about me. I am here simply to facilitate the conversation. And I am delighted and honored to be able to have a conversation with all of you featuring a very special visitor, Isaac Garcia-Sitton, who is no stranger to McGill School of Continuing Studies. And then, in fact, you'll learn, for those of you, I know some of you know him from way back when, but for those of you who don't, you'll discover in a moment why. And we've asked Isaac to join us today to tell us a little bit about how he got to where he is today. And so I would love to have Isaac tell us a little bit about what should we know about Isaac Garcia-Sitton in 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Carola. And again, I am honored and thrilled to be back to McGill School of Continuing Studies. And I also kudos to the CATS team for this fantastic and very timely initiative. So I'll try my best to keep it up to 2 minutes. So I was born in Spain, in Barcelona. On my father's side of the family, I'm Spanish. On my mother's side, I'm Panamanian. Half Egyptian, half Israeli, my grandparents. So Panamanian, Middle Eastern Spanish. I moved to the United States right out of high school, and I did my undergrad and grad degrees in the United States. Then I transitioned into the foreign service. So I was actually a diplomat for Panama, where I did a posting in the Consulate of Panama in New Orleans. And then I got a promotion and for posting at the Consulate of Panama in Montreal. And that's how I ended up in Canada in 2007. Moving to Canada for me was one of those seminal moments. It was pivotal. I felt for the first time in my adult life that I was at home. And for some of you, it might be strange because knowing just from what I told you, Montreal is very different from Spain and from Latin America. So although I was far away from family, I was far away from the climate, the tropical climate of Panama, I actually felt the Canadian values of multiculturalism, diversity, inclusion, equity, really much resonated with my personal values. So that's why I felt for the first time in my adult life that I was at home. So I very much felt that the nature of diplomatic work is that you need to continue moving, you need to go to your next post. So at the end of my posting, I decided to apply for the permanent residency. I actually got my permanent residency through the skilled working program in Quebec. And my first job after a few years of struggle, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, was at McGill School of Continuing Studies. So to me, I very much feel part of the McGill community. It is a very important and special place in my heart. The people, I have many friends and esteemed colleagues that are there. Montreal is a vibrant city that a lot of us had the opportunity to live in and love. So that's a little bit of my story. That's sort of how I sort of transitioned into post-secondary education, because I went from diplomatic work and my first job was, like I said, at McGill. Then from there, I got a position at York University, where I currently serve as Director of International Education and the Director of the English Language Institute, also in the School of Continuing Studies at York. And most recently, I just was appointed the Executive Director of International Student Enrollment, Education and Inclusion at Ryerson University. And I'll start that new role in September. So that's a little bit of my journey. Above all, for me, the role and the opportunities that I was given at that pivotal time in 2012 when I started a maternity leave at the School of Continuing Studies really provided for me these opportunities and definitely gave me not only the confidence, but the skills in order to be where I am today in post-secondary education.
Thank you. That's a great overview. And I wonder though, there must have been an incredible culture shock of going from diplomacy to higher education, or how would you see the differences in organizational culture? And for you personally, how did you have to adapt the skills that you had learned up until then? Was it a big change? Did you have to throw out everything and start over again? Or were there in fact some skills that you could transfer into this new setting?
Yeah, a great question. So for sure, there were a lot of transferable skills. I mean, I was, as a diplomat, you oversee several sectors. One of the sectors that I had to support was education. And I was based in Montreal, so I had clear understanding about the education sector in the province and then in Canada. As you already know, education in general is provincially legislated in our country. So you kind of need to understand how the systems work and so on. So I had I sort of have a window in that. To be very honest with you, it wasn't, and I think that's why this conference is so useful. As an immigrant, it's not like I made a conscious choice that I wanted to go from diplomacy into post-secondary education. I struggled, and I had a very clear, successful path, trajectory as a diplomat of what it could have been. And I decided, for the reasons that I just expressed, that I wanted to become a permanent resident. And I applied to hundreds of jobs, and I made it to several dozen searches and final rounds. And when it became to the point where it was between me and another candidate, I would always end up in a situation where I needed Canadian experience. Although I had been living in Canada, I thought I had a very successful diplomatic career. I obviously had the degrees in North America. I spoke the languages. So McGill School of Continuing Studies, at the time, the director gave me a chance. It actually was a maternity leave, and sort of provided for the space to for me to grow and to prove myself. So going back to the question around, so that's sort of how the transition happened. I would like to sit here and tell you that it was intentional, that I actually was very much looking for, I was applying in the education sector because that was one of the portfolios that I manage. But I also looked in portfolios like trade and international relations and other things that were perhaps more directly related to the work that I used to do. Around skills particularly, for sure, communication was important. There were a lot of transferable skills around written and verbal communications that I could leverage in both. My business acumen that I had and I sort of developed in years of diplomacy was very helpful as well. Sort of the cultural nuances and the interpersonal and intercultural communication skills that I developed were very, very useful as well. But I also try to, and we'll talk about that in a little later as well, but I'm a firm believer of lifelong learning. I do believe that we need to continue learning. That is one of the gifts that we have and we owe ourselves. However, you want to pursue that. It can be formal, it can be semi-formal, it can be self-directed, it can be informal. But I do believe it's very important to continue learning. And I was very eager and like many immigrants, interested in trying to prove myself and try to be better and improve the community around me. So that's how I sort of transitioned, and I very much felt at home at the McGill School of Continuing Studies. So I'm lucky that way.
Thank you. And in fact, speaking of learning, I think if I'm right, you've gone back to school again, not just for work.
I am, yes. I'm currently pursuing a PhD program, a doctorate in education, language, and culture. And my research interest is really around international students, their roles and transition into society, but I'm particularly interested in looking at internationalization and global engagement strategies, but at the institutional level. Right now I'm doing research in post-secondary institutions in Ontario, and how, from a policy perspective, we as institutions can provide for better transition for international students. And as we all know, we're a country of immigrants, but international students, for many, are considered an ideal immigrant, but they face the same struggles that any other immigrant coming to Canada when they have to transition. So that's why I feel that not only lifelong learning, but the mandates of schools like School of Continuing Studies across the country and across the world, I would argue, but particularly in Canada, they have such an important role because they are also there to provide for upskilling and then ultimately successful transition of international students and newcomers to our workforce and to our society.
I couldn't agree more. As a Dean of Continuing Studies, I absolutely believe in that. And I think in many ways, I mean, the French word of formation is perhaps even more appropriate than education in when we think about our lifelong learning needs. And I wonder, when you return to the classroom, a successful career underway, very busy, what did you find to be the most difficult? What was the greatest challenge for you going back as a student? And how have you managed, particularly the work-life balance that is involved in maintaining a very large portfolio of responsibilities at your work and your private life and your volunteer opportunities and all the things that you do to engage with the community, your life as a new Canadian, relatively new Canadian. How have you, what were the biggest challenges in balancing all of these competing demands?
I would say that would be the biggest challenge for me, to find that, to strike that balance. And in addition to that, so twofold, and I'll expand a little bit on the work-life balance, but I'll start with transition to really formal academic studies in a way of a doctorate, that which is very particularly unique, and you actually, it's not necessarily intuitive for many. I finished my graduate degree in 2001, and I started my PhD in 2018. So for me, there was quite the gap. And a lot of my peers and a lot of my classmates sort of were studying and doing their doctorate studies, but a lot of them transitioned right from an academic master's program. So academic writing, academic research, the theoretical frames, knowing the theories, knowing the thought leaders, all of that for them was very fresh and quite current. So for me, that was a bit of a struggle. But again, I go back to two key things. You definitely need to love to learn in order for you to be successful. Because, and I actually enjoy reading, and although I'm not going to say that I enjoy reading every single theory out there, some of them are quite interesting and allow you to look at things from a different perspective. So that's the first thing. I really enjoy and value different perspectives, different ideas. I believe that's how we grow collectively. So that to me was quite refreshing. So the struggle, and then the opposite side of that. The other thing too, which I also think is very important and is very part of who I am, it's part of my DNA. It has to do with community building, community values. I very much leverage the communities around me. So all of my classmates, my professors, peers that have gone through the journey, a doctorate journey, and even in conversations with you at other, the few times we have been able to connect on this. Anyone that pursues these sort of programs, they're very lonely. They're just lonely journeys. The research and the fact is that the definition of a PhD is that you're doing a unique contribution to your field. So by definition, it needs to be unique and it needs to be about you, which makes it lonely. It's about the individual. So, which it's to me kind of difficult, because like I said, I'm very much about communities and coming together and working with each other. So I've tried to find that. And so one of the outcomes have been that I have developed a different community, my community around my doctorate, community around the research that I do, that I'm very passionate about. So that has helped me sort of address those first issues that I sort of highlighted. The second piece, which is very real, and as you mentioned, and I'm assuming very real for you too, is to find, and to you and to many others, to try to find that work-life balance. And even more so now, like we're in the middle of the longest, well, it's quite unique because it's a global phenomenon, it's a global pandemic, but it's the longest sort of face-to-face disruption of working in a professional context in modern history, I would say. So for families that have young families, for individuals that don't necessarily have the space at home to be able to have that work-life balance, it's very real. So in order and to be honest with you, like, it sort of starts bleeding from having work into, and now we're everything doing it remotely. It's great because now we have access. So all of the things in our sector, in post-secondary education and education that told you that we've been talking about for years, about access to education via virtual means, all of that is out the window. So we are currently disrupting. The flip side of that is that we are constantly on. There is really no time to have a break. Sometimes, and you would appreciate this, we are in meetings 7 to 8 hours a day, straight through. Like, I eat 15 minutes and then I'll continue. Sometimes I forget to eat. And then in addition to that, you have to balance your studies. So that has been a different sort of struggle. And the only piece of advice that I would give, which I've been telling every member of my community, is to really focus on the things that you can control. We'll see definitely the other side of this. It builds resilience. Like I said earlier, I have been doing a lot of reflection. I worked in the Consulate of New Orleans before, during, and after Katrina. It is the closest thing that I have in my adult life that I can reflect back on. As a child, in the late 80s, our country, Panama, was invaded by the Americans. So I also went through that as well. So, and through all of those life experiences, both personal and professional, it has made me more resilient. I do think that difficult times, and in some cases even sorrow, will allow you to become resilient and would allow you to really develop those skills and see the other side of that. The only way we can really do it is our ability to come together and work on it together. But sorry for the long, drawn out answer, but it's very close to home right now.
Yes, very much so. And I want to remind our audience, our participants, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to post them in the chat, or if you don't want to bother writing it down and you have a question, just say, I have a question, and we'll try to call on you. So otherwise, we'll just keep continuing the conversation. But you speak a lot about the resilience and the strength that you found within yourself through all of these experiences. I wonder if I might take you on maybe a little bit less comfortable territory and talk a little bit about what were your weaknesses and how did you address them? Did you have to address them, or were you able to simply compartmentalize them and say, okay, go in that weakness drawer? When we're in interviews and someone says, well, what's your weakness? We always come up with a strength that we can make look like a weakness and then show how we overcame it. But, in all honesty, you're here among friends. What do you think, were there things that perhaps made it more difficult for you based on who you are, how you are, the skills you might not have?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Funny enough, that's one of my standard questions when I'm running a hiring process. I actually ask, what is your weakness that is not a secret strength? That's how I frame the conversation, because I do think it's important. And there's not a wrong or right answer. It's really more about to your point, to show vulnerability and to show that we're real and to really show your authentic self. I think it's key to be successful in life, and even more so, which I'm thrilled to see in the professional context. Organizations are very much looking for your authentic self. So I'll be very honest with you. So like I said earlier, I'm quite multicultural, very layered. My mother's side is Middle Eastern and Latin American. My father's side is Spanish. All of that comes with a lot of passion and energy that sometimes might not be taken the right way. And particularly, we live in a country that is so beautiful and multicultural, diversely rich. But when you're conveying a message in a professional context, it's sometimes your energy and the way your passion is conveying is not necessarily communicating the way you want to. So to me, it's a constant struggle. People that get to know me understand that I very much care and I genuine about people, and I'm very empathetic. I cannot tell enough how much I care about our community and about every member of our community, and the fact that I'm not very good at many things, but one thing I'm very good at is to surround myself with people that are really good at other things and allow for that space for them to be able to communicate. So that's really a difficult, for me, it's sort of challenging that energy and challenging my passion has taken some time and years to refine, because even as if I reflect back, even as a diplomat, when you are trying to communicate culturally in different parts of the world or with different cultures, there's distinct differences between the messaging and the words and your demeanor and your even your nonverbal cues. So it is important to be aware, to really be self-aware, and try to understand, to read the room, but really listen to others. And if you're not clear, ask questions and clarify before you allow for your passion and your energy sort of to take over. Because this is who we are. This is my authentic self. But it doesn't mean that I need to trailblaze my way through life either. I think it is important to provide for that space for others. So if I really needed to be honest, that's probably it.
Thank you. Well, we do have a couple of questions from the audience. I'd like to switch over to those, and then we can come back and continue. So one question is, obviously your work-life balance story initiated was, how do you keep focused? It sounded exhausting to all of us. So how do you maintain focus when you have to get pulled into so many different directions and you have to channel your passion all at the same time?
So I use a few productivity sort of hacks that I have sort of picked up through the years. I like to believe that I would like to believe that I'm efficient with my time, that I also am very organized and structured. So for instance, when I try to find some time to do what we call the productivity space, they call deep work. So I block some time so I can have thinking time around projects or things that that really require that cognitive space, so I can do that sort of deep thinking work. In addition to that, I also try to work in, there is a technique, it's called the Polymodoro Technique, where you can do like 25 minutes worth of work. So you actually put a timer for 25 minutes, and then you just devote 25 minutes to that particular task, but you are uninterrupted. So your email is closed, your phone is off, you do nothing but that particular task for 25 minutes. A friend once told me, so going back to the doctorate, a friend once told me that she had a friend that she actually wrote her dissertation by doing it in 15-minute chunks every morning. Mm-hmm. She would wake up every morning and write 15 minutes a day before her family would wake up and before her day started. So whatever works for you, honestly, I do think is really about finding, number one, most importantly, to be consistent and to ensure that you are focused into what you are going to do. Try to minimize the noise. So try to minimize all of the distractions that you have. And right now it's really difficult. Like we have smartphones, email, social media, Zoom. So like we are constantly bombarded with all of this digital stimulation. So really try to take all that out and focus on what you're supposed to be doing for that period of time. And that's sort of how I try to do it. It's not perfect. I'm delinquent too. Sometimes it's just you go back to old habits and you want to open your phone or you want to check your email. Other people don't, for instance, that for some of you that are getting emails all the time, some others, thought leaders in the space say that you should only check your email twice a day. for a specific amount of time. You check it for half an hour in the morning, half an hour at night. And there is a bunch of different ways of managing your inbox. And yeah, I know I don't do that, but I'm just sharing things that that sort of get in the way of that focused work that you're supposed to get done.
Thank you. I'm terrible at managing my inbox. So, but we do have some great questions that have come in. I'm going to lump them together a little bit to give you a chance perhaps to answer multiple ones at a time, if that's okay, Isaac, so we can really maximize the exchange with our audience, our guests. So there were a couple of questions around the transition into education, but then also into academe, and what you would recommend for someone who wants to transition into the education sector from a different industry. What kinds of transferable skills in particular do you think, and we talked about this a little bit, are there things from diplomacy that or any other skill that you think really resonate well in the education sector? But then we also had, there were people who were interested in the opposite direction of how do we go back out of education. And of course, you're now well ensconced in this, but what advice would you have for individuals who are finishing in academia, who finished their degrees, and they now want to get as far away from education as possible? So in both directions, what are the things that you would highlight as both marketable and transferable skills? And how do you find your way into a new field?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So maybe I'll take it at a more macro level, and then I'll go into like the specifics about micro education and transferring out and so on. So, and I get asked this question often by students and by newcomers to the country, because it's a reality. When you have new immigrants into the country, in some cases they're actually are not able to potentially do or continue with their careers for either their the way that the system is set up, or because they need to get a different sort of accreditation. Like there's a myriad of reasons why they wouldn't be able to do it. So that's a real concern, and it's very aligned with, let's say, the mandate of the School of Continuing Studies or others. So I'm a firm believer that of the T-shaped professional. So there is a breadth and depth of knowledge, and you can probably speak about this a lot better than I do, because this is very much at the core of what you do at the School of Continuing Studies. So I do think that there is an opportunity for every individual, in the spirit of a lifelong learning, to be developing sort of those depth and breadth of skills and competencies. But let's take a step back. So for instance, if you want to change your career because you like what you do, but you're not necessarily passionate about it in your current situation. So let's say you are in HR or you are in finance, but you want to move out of post-secondary education or the education sector. So maybe find a industry that you're passionate about. So you're really more interested in, for argument's sake, a finance, I don't know, banking or something else. Then maybe shift and do a pivot from your current role, from your current industry into a different industry. And that's a way of maybe pivoting your career, but not necessarily completely changing what you do. And you might be able to find, you might be able to find it more refreshing. And that can be a first step into something else later. Going back to what I just said, I do think it's very important to keep your skills very current. There is a lot of very transferable skills into what we do in post-secondary education that you could potentially use in something else around, we serve students. Everything that we do is student-centered. So in any industry where you're serving people, there is a lot of transferable skills that we do in education that you could use in those industries as well. Most importantly, and I say this often to all the forums with newcomers, it is very important to leverage your networks and your communities. It's key to not only be able to change careers, but it's also key to ensuring that you're able to successfully transition into something else. try to find a mentor, find someone that, rather than trying to fixate necessarily on a job, find people that are good at what they do into these industries that you're looking at and connect with them. I think, I mean, I get asked this all the time. I'm very open. I hope that all of you reach out to social media. Happy to connect with you on Twitter, on LinkedIn, meet for 15-minute coffee, 30-minute coffee. I think it is important that we don't sugarcoat it, and we're open to share our stories and the struggles, the good and the bad of what really happens, and how it's easy for us, what really worked and what really didn't work, and be open about asking and reaching out to others. And like I said, I would say that you should continue learning and then try to find passion into what you do. Like I said, I ended up in post-secondary education, not necessarily intentionally, but I am very passionate about it now. I genuinely believe that it's a beautiful sector because we're able to impact positively the lives of so many, and collectively we are able to, by impacting these lives, then improving our society. I would like to believe that we are also playing a part into sort of forming globally global citizens, and a lot of our systemic issues that we've had and that we have even recently seen, hopefully we can address through education and access to education. So for me, it's one of those things that it's beyond a career now. It's very much something that I'm passionate about, and it's part of who I am. So.
Great, thank you. We often speak of an avocation when it becomes more than a job and it becomes an avocation. I wanted to also congratulate you because you have been named, you were nominated for the RBC Top 25 Immigrant, RBC Top 25 Immigrant Award. And so congratulations on your nominations. That's amazing. And I know there may be some very interesting questions about that. But there was one question in particular that has been raised about the immigrant experience, and how did you in fact so successfully, and maybe not so successfully, maybe it looks successful from outside, but how did you transition into the Canadian workplace and culture? How different did you find the Canadian working culture from an international perspective, from your experiences in the US and elsewhere?
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I am very humbled by the nomination, and there is 75 shortlisted candidates, and I definitely would encourage everyone to go on the website and see there is an incredible amount. It's quite a testament of the great impact of immigrants to our country and to our society. So I'm very humbled by that nomination. To me, it wasn't, to be very honest, like I said earlier, perhaps I felt that there was a big alignment around my values. So when I moved here and I saw that diversity, equity, inclusion are very much values that are part of who we are. And I know it's not perfect. I'm sure that there's some of us that will say, well, we have all these many gaps and so on. But for someone that has lived and been all over the world, and well, someone that has traveled extensively and has been involved and exposed to people from all over the world, I can tell you with certainty that although it's not perfect, it's very good in Canada. So for me, that was, starting from that perspective, it was refreshing and something that I very much aligned with. In addition to that, like I said earlier, it wasn't smooth sailing throughout. Like I had to very much reach out and build my own communities. I really had to be humble and understand that I needed to adapt. I also needed to understand that that I needed to be open to criticism, that I needed to be open to be able to be humble and adapt and evolve and be flexible, because there's only one thing constant in life, which is change. So the nature of what we do, and the nature that I decided that I wanted to become an immigrant, and then I needed to transition from diplomacy into education, and then I needed to start again my career and sort of reimagine and readapt and continue learning and so on. All of that is change. And you have a choice. You can either you can either approach that with a positive outlook, with almost a sense of humor at times, with an open mind, or you can do the opposite of that. And I very much encourage everyone to really be open and be flexible, but also be humble. The fact is that you learn in every opportunity you have. You learn from people, you learn, like I said, through programs, but ultimately allow for that space for you to be able to leverage what Canada is really about, and for you to be able to leverage those communities. I think it is important that you don't give up, because it's not into it. Sometimes, like I said, I applied to hundreds of jobs before I actually landed my job. And it took me about a year and several months to get there. And I came from what I thought was a very successful journey as a diplomat, where I could clearly articulate how my skills and competencies could translate very well into any job. And so how I think I have been able to change, because it also changed you as an individual. Like going through this, it changes you who you are. On one hand, it raises and it builds resilience, like I said. But on the other hand, it also, as you continue growing in your career, it allows you the opportunity to, some say pay it forward, but I don't necessarily say that. I say that it's my responsibility to build the best community around me. I don't say that I'm paying it forward to anyone. On the contrary, I think that I am providing the same opportunities that were given to me, and I need the responsibility that we have collectively to sort of make that community. And even in my current role at the York University English Language Institute, I'm very proud to say that we're one of the most multicultural units at the entire university. York has over 10,000 employees, and we speak just at ULI over 30 languages in aggregate between staff and instructors. Many newcomers that this is their first job have been in our unit. So I don't necessarily look at it from that perspective. I really look at it about what sort of role we can play into creating this community.
I wonder, though, you raise a very good point, and some of the questions that we're seeing in the chat reflect that the immigrant experience in North America, both you and I are immigrants. I've been an immigrant both in the US and here. We've both been in diplomatic life. I think that universities perhaps maybe are also a little bit of a bubble. In that we perhaps are more polyglot, we are more international, there seems to be perhaps more fluidity in some places. But when we reflect on the immigrant experience that many of our colleagues are having, whether it is in Canada or in the US or elsewhere, there are some real barriers that we perceive as immigrants, but maybe they're really there. And it's not just about being paranoid, but maybe there really are some very concrete barriers. What do you see the role of international education being in perhaps breaking down some of those? Is that a role that international education plays, and how do we connect the great experiences that we have inside academia into other areas of the community of the nation, so that there is perhaps a breakdown of some of these barriers outside of education?
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, and I agree that with your comment that we are definitely in a bubble, and by default we're a microcosm of the society. Like, we're multicultural, we're open. Education is really at its core is really about providing that. The classroom is that safe space where you can have different perspectives, different ideas. That's the whole nature of what we do as education at a very primal level. So I agree with you that we're somewhat in a bubble. The point that you made around what role do we have, I do think that with experiential learning, really developing more and fostering programming with industry that would allow for students to successfully transition and to actually sort of develop these skills and competencies in placement and through real life experience, would in a way start taking down those walls and those barriers that you're describing. I think that universities, and particularly continuing education, plays a really interesting role in that way, because you're, and this is a great testament of it, you are a core part of our community. And now, good or bad because of the pandemic, we are a global community, even more so than we were before, because we are virtually communicating. So I do think that in a way, it would be, it's very much part of the mandate, and is very much part of the work that we do in education, but continuing doing so, and even almost like doubling down on those efforts, where we have more experiential education, where we really are developing programming not only to really meet the needs of, and we use these terms often in, let's say, continuing studies, or and even more so now that we're in the middle of a pandemic, like the future of work. What are the skills needed for to get us through this recession? What really is the programming? What are some of the emerging fields? What are some of, like, we talk about this very often, but at the end of the day, it's really about providing for people the opportunities to get this experience, and to your point, to be able to provide for a more, for an easier sort of transition and an easier working life. At the end of the day, I also think it's very important that we understand that people are more than their jobs and their work. And the moment that we're able to provide for that, and that we're able as organizations, and I'm talking more about the private sector, the moment that as an employer, even public or private, that we as employers understand what are the motivations, how do you engage with employees, what really provides for that high-performing individual, which has to do with trust, it has to do with engagement. All of those things all come down to, again, with understanding what are their motivations, and really dealing with them as people, culturally, the alignment with the values, and so on. So, yeah, that's what I think. You're muted, Carola.
Technology at its best, huh? I was trying not to interfere. You mentioned that you have obviously just now accepted a new position, and I can see from the chat there a number of people from York who are very sad to see you go. And we, of course, congratulate you on your new appointment. But I wonder if you mention a little bit about, particularly now during the pandemic, the needs that employers have. How did you go about your search during this time of remote interviewing and remote working and remote everything? And do you, in fact, think that employers are able to keep up with the demands that this new normal and the new economic challenges pose, whether particularly in Canada, where there is a sense that sometimes it can take a long time to get a new job, right? Even when someone is interested in hiring you, the time that it takes to identify highly qualified individuals, as one of our audience members points out, it can be really long. And so are we losing talent? So I just wonder if you could speak a little bit about both your own personal experience in a job change during COVID, but also more generally, what do you think employers can do to meet their own skills needs and to fill those skills gaps that they might perceive?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So for me, it was very difficult, to be very honest with you, for several reasons to go through a hiring process. Number one, because it's very, as you know, like the rest of the world, we had to pivot very quickly for instructional continuity to ensure that all of our courses were going to be continued on online. But then we also took a unique approach, particularly at ULA, which is the York University English Language Institute, which was soon after we transitioned online, we started developing programming for an online format. So rather than just continue delivering our courses 100% online of existing curricula that was done for face-to-face delivery, we actually started developing curricula for an online format. So the students were really getting that sort of materials and curricula that it was really supposed to be for online programming. So that was a huge monumental undertaking. In addition to that, we had hundreds of students that we needed to support to get back home. And beyond that, we also had hundreds of students in residence, all within our institute. So, our number one market in the institute is China. So we've been dealing with COVID since like late February, early March. So for us, this has been a very long, hard road. It's just been like 12, 14, 16 hours of work and for no break for 7 days a week at the beginning. And so it was really, really tough. So to be very honest, had no space to be thinking about anything else or to be doing anything else than supporting our students, supporting our team members, supporting our community just to get through this. And then in addition to that, to work from home. So you had to do all of that while at home. So that made it very difficult for me to even think about a job or how to prepare for an interview. What questions do you need to, like, any of those things that are just core to a hiring process, to me, were very challenging. So I did the best I could. I was very honest and very authentic. I was, one thing that I have learned from this, particularly from this pandemic, is clearly there are things that we won't be able to control, right? So it is very important that we at least allow for us to be humble and be genuine and to be able to connect with others at that level. So for me, that was another big problem, to be able to connect with the people on the other side of the screen. I feel that that's one of my skills. I really like people. I like connecting with people. I like to hearing and learning from people. And it's very difficult. It's not natural for me or anyone, I would argue, to do it virtually. So that was another key challenge for me. And I believe that it is important, particularly for me, it was a big decision. I've been at York for 5 years. So I needed to feel this set of confidence and sort of reassurance that I was doing the right thing. So those were some of the issues that I faced going through a hiring process in the middle of the pandemic. So like connecting, having to do it virtually, and in addition to that, the very real and heavy workload just because of what we're experiencing in our sector. Things that your second question was around skills.
My second question was really about employers and the fact that it can take employers a long time to find the right person. What advice would you have for employers in meeting their skills needs? We had some of our audience members who were concerned that it was taking too long for them to identify highly skilled individuals. We've also had questions raised around the skills gap and whether or not people are prepared properly to employ. So what advice would you give an employer to be able to meet to fill the skills gaps that they might have? And how to do it
Yeah.
more quickly?
Yeah, I mean, disruption creates opportunities. I believe that. So on one hand, this is also because there has been such a disruption and across all sectors at every level. I also feel that there is an opportunity for employers to have access to a different sort of candidate pool that historically you wouldn't, because this is very unique in that way. In addition to that, I also will encourage employers to sort of analyze and assess what would be the mid to long-term impact of the pandemic to their own core business, and almost do it like a gap analysis, understanding what skills and competencies are needed in their human capital to really be able to sustain, but beyond that, be able to scale up eventually, or be able to continue and transition beyond the pandemic and beyond the disruption. I think it is important that organizations are doing a lot of this reflection and it should not be anecdotal. It should be evidence-based. It should be data-driven. It should be really intentional strategic planning that they need to be doing at the organizations to really understand what would be the short, mid, and long-term effects of this, and how does that translate into your workforce? How does that translate into your human capital? How does that translate into skills and competencies that would allow your organization to survive on one hand, but beyond that to sustain and then grow? And then ultimately, and I sort of touch on that, I would also encourage employers, and I try to do that in a very micro level in my own very small team and the best way I can. But I also think it's very important, and I'm happy to see that, for instance, across the education sector, employers have made a point around wellness, well-being, mental health, and ensuring that their employees are taken care of. And the fact is that it's a very real situation. There is fatigue. There is the necessity for us to not be on all the time. There is a necessity for you to really disconnect and take the time. So on one hand, to ensure that they are supporting their own workforce, and they're supporting their own teams, but as they are potentially bringing new individuals into their team, for them to sort of redefine what are sort of those guidelines and measures that they're going to be taking to ensure that we're able to find and strike that balance, to ensure that people are taken care of, to ensure that they will continue to be able to perform the best way they can.
Thank you, Isaac. I know we are gradually running out of time, but obviously your story has resonated tremendously with many of us. And in fact, there's a question from, is it Juan Pablo? Carrias-Chaveri, who was apparently going through the very same career transition that you initiated. And he asked a very good question, which I'm not sure you have a good answer to. I don't have one because I don't have a crystal ball, but it is to say, will there be fewer or more opportunities for professional immigrants in post-pandemic times? And why and in which sectors? So I wonder what you would say to that question.
there will be fewer or more I'm trying to read it. Fewer or more opportunities for professional immigrants in post-pandemic times. Why? In which sectors? Okay, so yeah, I don't think I have a good answer, but I'll give you an answer. I do think that there is a lot of research right now being done around, and actually a lot of it is even done by government, so all levels of government, but in addition to that, that's informing a lot of the work, let's say, of continuing studies, how they're developing new programs. So there is a lot of research around emerging fields, needed skills and competencies for the future of work. What is going to be sort of the mid to long-term effects of the pandemic, and how is that going to address, or how is that going to impact the workforce? How is that going to impact our economy? How is that going to impact at all levels of government, so city, so municipal, provincial, and federally? How are we going to be able to get beyond the recession that will come just from the sheer number of subsidies and all of these funding that we have given as government in order to get us through the pandemic? So I would look at probably some of these interesting reports that are coming out there, and try to identify which ones are those sectors. So that's where I would start saying those are the list of possible fields and industries that will be needed. The fact is, like I said, this disruption have also allowed for some innovation, and it will continue to provide for that. It has showed us that we can connect virtually. It has showed us that there are things that can be done better, more efficiently online rather than face-to-face. So I think that will have also an impact, and proportionally that also will have an impact on skills and competencies that people may or may not have. So going back to the T-shaped professional, what are sort of those skills and competencies that you may have or might need to upgrade, or you necessarily don't have them, you need to get and attain and achieve? So I don't think I have a clear answer about specific list of which ones are these industries, but what I will leave you with, or what I can offer, is that there's a lot of great work around research and bodies of data that are being done right now and will continue being done both by the government and also by the private sector. RBC has done a lot of great work around that, reports around KPIs and metrics and what's needed for our economy to not only to survive but to bounce back. So that's where I would point out JP, Juan Pablo, I think it is, or I don't want to make up your name, but that's where I would point him out. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, Carola? I'm just curious.
Well, I would agree with you. I think that there are actually, I'm a glass half full person, so I do think that the answer is there will actually be more opportunities. They may be in different directions. Certainly, we are seeing this even in traditional industries like aviation, which has to go through a fundamental rethinking of what it does. But the reality is that we live in a global and a mobile society, so there will always be a need for means of transportation. So we see already, for example, that now there is as Air Canada canceled regional air service, there is a new service coming up that will lease regional airlines working together with indigenous community-owned airlines and others to create new transportation networks. We see it with this demand to online education, the growth in instructional design, in anything having to do with cybersecurity. These are areas that were already on the upswing that I think will actually boom. The other piece I would say is that, to your point about flexibility and adaptability, is that we are in fact now in a position where many industries have been disrupted. Many individual small workplaces, large workplaces, everyone has to rethink, how do we do what we do and how do we do it well? And this is where I think individuals who are coming with continuing education and a thirst for continuing learning, benefit, because the bottom line is we know how to ask questions. We may not always have the answer, but as long as you know how to ask a good question and find the answer, then you really are set for the future and for life. And what now is opening is that people realize they don't have all the answers. They have to ask more questions. So people like us in education, but also individuals who are rethinking their lives, have an opportunity to help that disruption and move it forward in a way that we might not have been able to do before the pandemic. So I see this very positively. Isaac, I want to thank you and all of our colleagues. We have come together here in a space that if we were to be physically located and even virtually, we are inhabiting space that has long served as a meeting site among Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. And I want to recognize and acknowledge the diverse Indigenous people for their legacy that they have left for us, but also the important work that we have to continue to build an inclusive, a diverse society, whether it is in Canada, whether it is in Quebec, whether it is in Ontario. And it is people like you who are making such a tremendous contribution to realizing that vision of our nation and of our planet, frankly. So I want to thank you personally and on behalf of all of my colleagues and all of us in the group to have you join us here today to realize this legacy that has been left to us by our forefathers and mothers. And wish you all the best in your transition and hope that you will find your way back to Montreal on visits, and of course virtually you are always a guest of ours. Mi casa, tu casa. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the great questioners, and we hope you will continue to find your inner power through Power Skills 2020. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you so much, and it has been a true pleasure. Thank you to the CATS team. Thank you so much, Carola. It has been a true pleasure for me, and I hope everyone that you keep well. All the best, and I hope to soon. Feel free to connect here. It would be my true pleasure to connect with you. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. So we will start logging out. And close.
Thank you, Nayo and Val. Great show. Emily,
Thank you, Carola. Thank you.
Everyone, this was amazing. Yeah. Thanks.
It's when you have great fodder to work with, right? It's like working with clay.
That was flawless. Thank you, Carola.
Have fun, and I will see you at the next event in a couple of days. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Enjoy. Bye. So should we meet on the other one while we have 4 minutes?
Oh my God, there's 4 minutes? Okay, I'll meet you guys there.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yes.
Guys,
Okay.
I won't be coming because I have my last class.
Oh, it's true. Eh? Emily, good luck.
Good luck. I can't wait to hear how it's been going. Oh, Nayo, Facebook Live?
Facebook Live, good. Yeah.
Okay.